To dive in a little bit more to what we're seeing, CNN military analyst, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton joins us now. Colonel, there's a lot of talk about whether or not this was in fact classified information, the details that were revealed in this text chat, and what an adversary could take away from that information. What is your take on what we saw and the type of risk it could pose?
Yeah, Erica, there are several things to look at here. First of all, you have the specific weapons platforms that are mentioned right here. You have the F-18s that are mentioned, and you have the MQ-9s, which is the Predator Reaper drone. The other thing that you have, the timing. 12:15, 13:45. This is when he did this, and then he talks about the first strike window starts at at this particular time, and that the strike package should be on time. The other thing is that he mentions this term trigger based, so that could mean several different things. But what we're talking about here probably is either an asset that is out there that is waiting to be tasked to hit a specific target. They know what target they're going to hit, but they're only going to hit if they're given that go-ahead to do so. Or it could be a euphemism for a particular base that they're at. So that is the first part of the text. The second part here, again, we have the same thing with the weapon system, and you have the times where everything happens. And then he says at 14:15, he says, or 2:15, he says, strike drones are on target. And this is basically when the drones will actually drop the bombs, and that will be based on the coordination with the F-18s that are working those so-called trigger-based targets. So this is one of the areas where you can see how much detail is actually used in each of these texts. And then the other thing you have is the second strike. So not only did we talk about the first strike, but we talked about the second strike. And you mentioned the weapons, he mentions the weapons platforms, and the fact that the Tomahawks are being launched. These are the shipborne missiles that are actually going to be used in this kind of an operation. And this is where the aircraft carrier launches these, the F-18s from this perspective. But the other part is, of course, you launch the Tomahawk missiles that he talked about here. And this is, a very critical element because it shows all the different aspects of the weapons platforms that we have here. And here you have the target being struck, and of course the resulting explosions from that area.
Colonel, what does it tell you that the specific targets that they picked were targeted? Is there anything that reveals something to you about the effort to go after specific Houthi rebels?
So one of the key things to see about this, Boris, is that the very fact that he's talking about specific targets can mean several things. But if you know the target area and you're an intelligence analyst, you're looking at the area where we're talking about. You're looking at Sana'a as the capital, which is a possible area, and then this city near the Saudi border, which is called Sada, that is a stronghold of the Houthis. So you know at the very least that one of two areas is going to be struck by this, maybe even both. And if you were intercepting this kind of information, you would know that to prepare, if you are the one that is charged with informing the Houthis, you'd know to prepare these areas for a possible strike. And that's why this kind of thing is really important, because the reason you classify these kinds of conversations and the plans that are resulting in these kinds of strikes, the reason you classify that is to prevent the adversary from knowing what you're going to do. And if that ever got out into the open, they could protect these areas, and that would make it really hard for us to conduct these operations as successfully as we did.
It's really important to walk through all that, Colonel. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, let's get some more perspective on the testimony. CNN national security analyst Peter Bergen joins us live now from Washington. So, Peter, when you look at just the specifics here, when it comes to the sort of second trove of text messages that were released here, talking about the exact times of F-18 launches with the first strike package, and just to sort of reiterate to our audience, a strike package includes the personnel and the weapons used in an attack. And then you've got the idea of talking about F-18s, the Navy fighter jets, and also the MQ-9s as well, the armed drones. Just walk us through what you make of Pete Hegseth's response, this idea that this was not at all war plans that were shared.
Well, I think he's making a rather sort of Jesuitical distinction between a war plan, which would be a campaign, and an attack plan, which is what this is, and which is part of a campaign, but is not a campaign plan. So I think he's sort of hiding behind, a way of sort of just kind of obfuscating what is clearly an attack plan, which clearly is sensitive, whether it's classified at a certain level. He does have, as the Secretary of Defense, has the right to declassify information. Did he declassify this before he sent it around on this text chain? I have no idea. But I think the question of classification is a bit of a red herring. Clearly, this is highly sensitive information, whether it was classified at the secret level, the top secret level, or some higher level. This was not information that you would want published or disseminated or be accessed by any kind of rival of the United States. And one interesting thing I think we're beginning to understand is A, Tulsi Gabbard was overseas when some of this was happening. And B, were the 16 or 17 people who were on part of this group chat, were they on secure phones? Were they on just a regular cell phone? That's not clear. And Steve Witkoff was in Russia. He during this, he's the special envoy to Russia and also the Middle East for the Trump administration. He's tweeted out that when he was in Russia, he was on a secure phone. So but clearly the Russians would have a strong interest in knowing what the special envoy to Russia was receiving when he was in Russia. So there are a lot more questions now, and I think that they made a big mistake, I think, in yesterday's press conference. I mean, President Trump called Jeffrey Goldberg out as a sleazebag. They said a bunch of things about none of this being classified. There were no war plans. And, Goldberg and Shane Harris, who wrote the story this morning in the United States, clearly felt, well, okay, they're saying it's not classified. They're saying we're sleazebags and we're lying. So here's the evidence. And I think everybody's probably broadly aware of what's in this now. And it's certainly, I think, embarrassing.
Embarrassing, and perhaps still poses some sort of risk in terms of how intelligence is shared in the United States if we can't even have the president and his top officials acknowledge how devastating this was and make sure to launch an investigation to make sure it doesn't happen again. I mean, Peter, you of all people know that the Houthis are a formidable force, and they have been a thorn in the side of not only the United States and its allies, obviously Israel as well, for a number of years now. And the fact that you even had Tulsi Gabbard acknowledge that the Houthis have shot down U.S. aircraft and drones over the course of the last year and a half, the fact that we had methods of targeting revealed here, I mean, if any of this had been intercepted by an adversary, if the Houthis had knowledge or a heads up about what was about to transpire, things could have turned out quite differently.
Well, Bjarne raised a good point. So, I mean, who are the Houthis' closest allies? It's the Iranians. The Iranians have some capability. They're not as capable as the United States or other major powers, but they certainly have capabilities on the cyber kind of side. And this was clearly a conversation that was not conducted. The president himself yesterday said this should have been conducted in a SCIF being a secure compartmented information facility. The Situation Room in the White House is an example of that. But you can also make your own SCIFs. When in President Trump's first term, when they were doing strikes on Syria, they created a SCIF at Mar-a-Lago using a specialized tent, which prevents people from listening in on your conversations. And then it's typical in any administration for the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, to have a SCIF in their own house. So, really, I think just people got lazy here and they just were having this sensitive conversation on Signal because it was easy, not because it was the right thing to do. And it also raises the question of how many other conversations were conducted about these kinds of issues on Signal, because it seems like this was a pretty routine thing for the tone of everybody on the call is like everybody's chiming in with political ideas and intelligence ideas, and is this a good thing or a bad thing? It clearly feels like this is not the first time they've had a discussion of a sensitive issue on this kind of chain.